I'm Sean Fennessey, and this is The Big Picture, a conversation show about bloodsuckers. Later in this episode, I'll have a conversation with Robert Eggers. He's the writer-director of Nosferatu, an extravagantly designed new remake of the 100-year-old German expressionist film classic. This is Eggers' third time on the show. He explains in great detail how and why he made this movie. To put it bluntly, he really knows his worlds. He really knows his craft. He really knows why he built them. Stick around for that conversation. But first, we got to talk about the demon. We got my two demons here, my demon boys, my demon babies, Rob Mahoney, Chris Ryan.
We are in Congress with the beast, I like to think.
I've been filing down my teeth for this one.
You guys really are. I've been looking forward to this episode for a very long time, and I think you and I talked about it like 4 months ago.
I've been looking forward to this movie for a long time.
I have as well. We're talking about Nosferatu, which is a very exciting new film. That is essentially what I just described. It's a remake of a classic film, and it is so much more than that, and it is also like not much more than that at all.
Yeah.
So let's just jump right into it. CR, Nosferatu, what did you think of the movie?
I was bowled over by the design and the cinematography and the execution of it, and not very emotionally connected to it at all. I was kind of surprised. I went in relatively blind, not reading a lot about his intentions or what was gonna take place, and was a little surprised at just how faithful it was.
Yeah.
Which I can't wait to talk to you guys about, because I wonder whether or not he addressed that with you, Sean, but why? Why do such a kind of on your knees, hands clasped, let's do the most religiously accurate version of this demon, of this anti-religious figure, and it was kind of surprising. Midway through, I was like, oh yeah, I actually know this story.
I know this story.
Quite well.
I've heard this one.
But then I guess that frees you up to just notice things in the corner of frames and in the background of frames. Rob, what'd you think?
I'm along the same lines. I think it's much less twisty than his other movies.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, I was kind of waiting for that turn, waiting for some deviation, and it's not there. That said, I think you're still held so captive by the effects in this movie, by the tension of it, by the visual styling, as you mentioned. I still felt unsure of what was going to happen second to second in a way that made for a really satisfying viewing experience. So it's the story, the beats. You're still going to be fucking terrified by it. And I would love to meet the person who isn't.
Yeah, I'm pretty much on the same page. I was captivated by the movie. I love this kind of movie. I've been a huge, huge fan of the Eggers project. I have felt over the last few years like he has been kind of upending the expectations of these classic genre or mythological tropes and stories and fables, and finding new ways into understanding what they mean to us and what they mean to him. I'm not sure if this one totally gets there ideologically or emotionally the way that I felt like the Lighthouse did, or even the Northman did, with especially some of that psychedelic Pegasus imagery near the end of that movie. But there's just a level of craft in this movie that is very, very few people can accomplish what he does. And if you care about that sort of thing and can be cowed by it in a movie theater, man, he's cooking. He's doing the thing that he is so good at. Why he made it is an interesting question. We did talk about it. I was fortunate enough at my screening to see a Q&A with him afterwards, between him and Guillermo del Toro. And it was it was like Barry Bonds and Hank Aaron talking to each other. I was just these are the two guys who just get this more than anybody get. They've felt these ideas more deeply in both good and bad ways. I think in a way they both get to be so down the hole of their interest that sometimes it feels like no one else can enter the hole with them. But in that conversation, tons of things that as I was watching the film, I was like, is that right? Why is this like this? They just talked about openly, and they would just be like, for example, I don't think this is a spoiler to say this, but fairly early on, there is a staking sequence of a vampire in an open field in Romania or Transylvania, wherever they are. And the stake is metal. And the reason that the stake is metal, it was explained to me by Robert Eggers, though not in the film, is because when you would stake a vampire in this mythology, you would stake him to the ground so that he could not get up again.
Gotcha.
So wooden stakes and that version of vampire storytelling is something that evolved over time, but is not quote unquote historically accurate to the occult. That's a cool detail.
Yeah.
I liked hearing it as someone who's seen probably 200 vampire movies in his life.
Yeah.
I didn't know that, and I'm happy to have known it. I don't know if that makes it a better movie.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like I was thinking about all my favorite vampire movies, and they all have scenes where someone definitely explains all the vampire stuff. They're just like, in this iteration of vampires, they can do this.
This works. This doesn't work. No garlic. Yes, crosses.
Let me throw something out at you about Eggers. Can we start there before we go into
course.
the movie itself? Which is that he's the doom metal Wes Anderson. And that a lot of the same critiques people throw at Wes Anderson, which is that you are working with these dioramas and that everything that we see and hear is precisely fixed by you and that there is not a lot of like accidents or life or spontaneity to it. And that your movies are like essentially like emotionally vapid. I disagree with. Wes Anderson is one of my favorite filmmakers. I find his films incredibly emotionally moving, even more so as he gets older. I feel like he's tapped into a kind of somber knowingness that maybe his early movies didn't even have. But so I feel resistant to throw that same criticism at Eggers, where it's just like your movies are about you having all the control over everything I see and feel, but nothing in this movie is like actually about being alive. But what do you guys
In
think?
fairness, this movie is also about not being alive.
it's true.
Well, yeah.
Important plot points.
Yeah, but like there are ideas in this movie and there are themes in this movie, but I think what he really wants to make is a fucking Dracula movie. And he wants to make the perfect Dracula movie that he's probably been seeing in his head for his entire life.
Well, what do you think? Because I do have some information regarding that.
I would say two things. One, everything in his movies does feel so considered, like down to these iron staking details in a way that makes me feel immersed in the world in a Wes Andersonian sort of way. Like I am in it. From minute one, I am grabbed by the throat of this movie. I am locked in. And because of that, I think I have a lot more latitude for whatever it is, whatever kind of ride it wants to take me on. I agree with you that overall, like emotionality is not always the most vivid part of the movies that he makes. That said, I think all of his movies have a lot to say about the way human beings interact with mythology, right? It's not just reinterpreting myth. It's what are we doing with myth in real life? Like all the superstitions that you get in Nosferatu, even in things like The Witch, where it's like all of the paranoia that's emerging from believing someone to be something else, which is a huge part of the vampire story in a lot of ways too. It's about the ways that we as humans harness our fears and our paranoias and how we wield them against each other or how we try to protect ourselves and ultimately fail.
I think this one is particularly complicated in trying to understand the Eggers story as a director because it's a movie that since The Witch came out, he has said he has wanted to make. It's a movie that he has staged a stage adaptation of this story at a very young age and has clearly just been consumed by this movie and by vampire movies and Stoker's novel and all of the things that are a part of it. And so it's just like when all you want to do your whole life is tell these kinds of stories, and particularly this story, there is invariably like something kind of airtight and impenetrable about it because you can feel how long he's been wrapped around it. Like The Lighthouse feels like something that developed over time as he got older, as opposed to something that was just like, this is so dear to me. This would be like me making a Transformers movie. You know, like nobody could really get their way in.
It's not Megalopolis though, right? It's not been poured over to the point that it's come apart. Like,
it's not overthought at all. No, it is still this very like sharply constructed thing. And maybe it's because it has the framework of it being a remake and a remake of a kind of odd thing, which is that Nosferatu comes after Bram Stoker's Dracula, but precedes the Hollywood film. And so it is sort of an adaptation, sort of not. The characters are not the same from the Stoker novel, but some are similar and some are not. It's not quite the same adventure story. It's a little bit of it's a story about obsession and lust and disease between two and three people, really. It's a fairly contained story. And so him having that framework from the Murnau movie, I think really works in his favor in some respects and works against him in others. Because through 45 minutes of the movie, to your point, I was like, okay, so he's doing that movie.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, he's not
straight up
going too far away. And in fact, like during our conversation, there's one fascinating, fabulous sequence in the 22 movie where the demon is leaving his estate in Transylvania or Romania or wherever, and he's putting caskets on the wagon so that he can head to Germany to come to his new estate that he has acquired from Hutter. And Murnau in 1922 manages to shoot and film and cut this sequence where like the caskets like magically float onto the top of the wagon. And it's, you know, very early cinema technology. And it's like, it is when you're watching the movie, it catches you.
Yeah.
And he chooses not to do that sequence at all in the movie, which is interesting because you could do it now in an amazingly interesting way. Even in a practical way, you could do it a fascinating way. And I asked him about it, and he was like, yeah, I just didn't think that was cool. Like, I didn't want to do it. And I was like, but you did like the whole other movie. Like, what, you did everything else. Which is interesting that he still is applying directorial vision. Like, he still has his taste inside of
but
this
he's still
tight box.
13.
But he's got his idea
Are
of
we all?
what works and
Really?
what doesn't. We should say that this movie stars Bill Skarsgard as the title character, Nicholas Hoult as Hutter, the I guess the envoy from a real estate agent when the demon reaches out and says, I would like to buy a piece of property.
Yeah.
And Lily-Rose Depp, who I think is really ultimately the star of this movie, as the woman who has a profound psychic bond with the Nosferatu character, the Count. Lily-Rose Depp is an important person in Chris's life. She is, of course, the daughter of Johnny Depp and an actress in her own right, accomplished actress. She's also the star of the television series The Idol.
Yeah, Chris was telling me all about it. Its own kind of vampirism in that
Yes,
show.
that's exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah. She's like a blood bag for like Dracula's modern and past. Yeah.
Well, maybe that says it. So you felt. I think my big takeaway from this movie is, wow, she's incredibly gifted.
Yeah.
I think this is like a great, great, great horror movie performance. And it's a very fine line in a horror movie performance. You can really overdo it. You can really undersell it sometimes when you're working in an auteur horror environment. I thought she was phenomenal, both physically and emotionally, in a movie that could have been harder to connect to. What did you think?
This is like an Olympic gymnastic performance.
Yeah.
I think the physicality of it is super athletic, super interesting. She does a lot of tongue acting at a certain point. And I'm like, I've literally never seen that happen before in a movie.
That's the thing, is that
It's
like
crazy.
what she does physically. I was kind of, Rob and I saw this together and on a very slow drive back down the 5. I workshopped, what if they had swapped Emma Corrin and Aaron Taylor Johnson into the Nicholas Hoult and Lily-Rose Depp roles? Because Aaron Taylor Johnson and Emma Corrin are lively and have like kind of like a much more naturalistic feel to them. But that's kind of the point, is that these two people are open to this kind of persuasion, this kind of connection, maybe this kind of experience, because they are so kind of flat. And then as Lily-Rose Depp becomes frankly more possessed over the course of the movie, it's hard to imagine anybody else doing this.
But I get the compulsion, because like Emma Corrin, every time I see them on screen, it's just I want more.
Yeah.
Like I want a variety of roles. I want to see what they can do. Like Aaron Taylor Johnson is getting to be maximum ham, which is my favorite mode. That he does a lot of great things in a lot of movies. That's my favorite mode of his. But I don't want to short shrift Nicholas Hoult, who has a good portion of this movie, not quite to himself, because you got Orlok kind of lingering in the background, slightly out of focus, but him progressively losing his shit and getting laughed out of Romanian villages is a highlight of this movie for me. And I really love it.
Honestly, it's happy Hulta days, because we got this in the order and juror number 2. Like,
we were just talking about it earlier this month on the show, just how he has suddenly found himself at the center of movie culture in an interesting way. I guess he just did a reunion interview with Hugh Grant on the award circuit because of his About a Boy days, which I thought was sweet. I'm a big fan of Holtz, as I said on the show earlier, and I think he's very well suited to this. Hutter is like, he's the ultimate cuck. He is he's the original cuck.
Yeah.
And the ending shots of this movie are just like peak cuckdom.
Yes. Yeah. Observing what has transpired. It's unbelievable. So I enjoyed him. I agree with you too about Aaron Taylor Johnson and Emma Corrin. They're both great. They're doing what they're sort of surrogates for the audience, where they're just like, this can't really be what's going on, right?
They're just like, this is depression, or this is like, you just need to get a good job, you know?
Is this movie scary?
I think so.
No,
not scary. You don't think people are going to be scared by this movie?
I'm just not scared, because like
you're dead inside.
I am dead inside. I was waiting for Art the Clown to come.
No, that's a Nosferatu sequel I would watch.
You go.
Yeah, it would be awesome if like the CR cut was like all these caskets open and Art the Clown and in a violent nature guy jump out with chainsaws and shit.
That's good, but that would not have been scary either. This
is why AI is going to happen.
Oh, please don't give them any ideas. The the reason I ask that is because one thing that Eggers really just doesn't do is jump scares until this movie.
Yes.
This movie is the first time he's really used conventional horror tactics and right out of the chute.
Yep.
So in the first 5 minutes, that sequence is, I think, really effective, right? At the first 2 minutes of the
Completely.
movie, where you're sort of in Lily-Rose Depp's mind and she's having kind of like a waking nightmare about her connection with the Nosferatu character. And
Say his name.
his name is Count Orlok.
Yeah.
And we
respect
respect him in this house.
Greatly.
Thank you, Orlok, for all you have given us. I want to talk a lot about Skarsgard and Orlok, and I think Chris does too. But he, those hard smash cuts and the shrieking sounds and basically the James Wan style of filmmaking is applied here by a filmmaker who is otherwise, with the exception of maybe the mermaid freak out in the lighthouse, like a couple, maybe 1 or 2 moments in The Witch, but for the most part, he doesn't use that stuff. And I noted with some interest that the producers of this film are Chris Columbus and Eleanor Columbus, who he told me reached out to him after The Witch and wanted to work with him. Chris Columbus.
Like as in Chris Columbus.
The director of Home Alone.
Yeah.
And who is a traditional Hollywood storyteller to the fullest. And my suspicion is that there were some suggestions to maybe commercialize the film somewhat,
Does this feel commercial?
Ultimately, no. But one thing about Eggers is that he's been able to find a big audience by pretty much sticking to his guns.
Yeah.
These movies are, even if not all of them are box office successes, The Lighthouse was the OG, oh wow, it made that much money, A24 movie. There's a bunch of those now where We Live in Time makes $25 million and you're like, oh wow, that's actually, Heretic made $30 million. That's pretty good. I think that Lighthouse made $20 million in 2018 when it was released, which is crazy because it's
two guys in
Robert
a room.
Pattinson farting on Willem Dafoe in a lighthouse.
That's cinema to me.
It's same for me. Nevertheless, I don't know. Am I overreading how much he's attempting to bend to the will of an audience in the filmmaking?
I just didn't see it as that commercial an endeavor. I think the biggest payoffs are the way that a story is realized to maximum possible creepy gothic effect. For someone like me, who I am somewhat horror inclined, but I'm not in the streets like Chris is in that way.
Yeah.
I find it creepy enough. I see that opening sequence, and I don't think it's a spoiler to talk about literally the opening sequence of the movie, but just the way that the vampirism is shown on screen and conceived as this physical, violent, animalistic, straight to the heart kind of action.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just horrified to see it again.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm spending the whole movie in dread, just waiting for the next person to get bitten, the next person to get attacked. And then there's this whole obviously there's always a psychosexual thing with vampires, but Lily-Rose Depp is sort of moaning, undulating in her own way.
Yeah.
And Orlok is doing a weird, again, animalistic convulsion.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot going on that I'm sure we can unpack.
I really like all that stuff. We can talk about it when we
If
get
three
into
dudes
the
would
movie.
like to unpack that, we can, but there's a lot.
Were you openly fist pumping when Lily-Rose Depp was thrashing her body and
I was
moaning?
actually thinking of could we overlay the Tarantino monologue about Like a Virgin, but for Nosferatu? It's Nosferatu is about this chick, man, and she meets this guy.
Wow. Is Ellen Hutter a dick tease? I believe that's the phrase that Quentin uses in that scene.
I found this movie really disturbing, but not scary. I think part of that is just, this is just a little thing about me. I don't really find dreams very scary, especially represented on screen.
Oh.
So I'm not an Elm Street guy. I find the it's happening in your head part to be a little bit kind of of a distancing
Honestly,
technique.
you're one of the most even-keeled guys I've ever met, so that makes a ton of sense.
There's a lot to be scared of in our waking life. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, my
Rats
nightmares
among
are
them,
also
apparently.
pretty pedestrian too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you say is the number one nightmare you have?
It's all TMJ related. So it's just always
TM,
You're just-
your
yeah,
jaw.
the jaw.
it's
You're
always
just clenching too
teeth.
tight.
It's my teeth are clenched, my teeth are falling out, stuff like that.
Sounds like Orlockian to me.
Do you think I've been?
Are you the demon? Is
You've
that
been
what we're
visited
saying?
in the night.
I
Do you
don't have
think
nightmares.
I'm
I am the
Lily-Rose
demon.
Depp, and sometime at some point, some Romanian football manager is going to come across this scene for me. You have been watching my highlights for years.
Don't spoil Orlok, please. Do you think the movie is sexy at all?
In the aforementioned way, sexual,
Yeah.
not sexy.
Okay.
Hell yeah.
You just went home and knocked one out. Okay. I do think that we probably should talk specifically about Orlok and the decisions that are made around Orlok. If you don't want to hear anymore, we really haven't spoiled much of the movie, but I think we're going to spoil not plot points per se, because the plot is sort of unspoilable.
Yeah.
But the decisions that were made, and I could sense that Eggers was a little concerned about this as well when we were talking, to not kind of give away too much. But I think the choices that he makes that deviate or that are meant to be more faithful to the occult study that he's done are interesting and fun and are kind of the reason to see the movie, honestly. So if you don't want to hear any more, fast forward. We'll talk about vampire movies in about 15 minutes. All right. So I mentioned the metal stakes thing. And that was when we got to that sequence in the film. I was like, what is this? This doesn't happen in Nosferatu. Well, I don't know who that guy in that casket is.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started feeling like, is this a dream, a nightmare? What has even happened? I believe that predates the carriage sequence where the carriage comes to pick
The
him
ghost
to take him
carriage.
to-
Yeah,
yes, the
that's-
ghost
so
I mean,
carriage.
don't get in the ghost carriage. As a general rule, like,
Yeah.
just don't do it.
I loved that scene though,
Oh,
with the spinning camera and the way.
Oh
that
my
it
god! Like
turns
all
and
the stuff
that
in the
stuff is so cool.
Carpathians and like the tracking shots in as he's going into the camp is just incredible.
That stuff is amazing. And then he does eventually arrive at Orlok's castle, and he enters, and they're there to do a real estate deal.
It's love it or list it,
It's
man.
just straight up
Yeah.
Redfin. And
What's the market on derelict castles, do you think?
I don't know. I mean, it seemed like he wanted something a little bit more like a 2-bedroom,
Yeah.
like an
and there are
expanded
so many
studio.
NIMBYs in Visburg right now. You know what I mean? They're just like,
Yeah.
I don't want any Orlocks in my.
Honestly, fair.
Yeah.
A lot of time in the movie is spent on like signing and reading documents, which is not something I expected, but that is also faithful to the original. The Count is not fully revealed for an extended period of time. We see him in a kind of blur in the distance in the background
Yeah.
of the movie. But we do hear his voice, and you gave us just a little sneak peek of that voice, which I thought was incredibly effective and funny and also somewhat unintelligible at times. But Skarsgard has put like clearly a vibrato and like a beaver carcass into his throat at the same time. And
it never breaks. So just,
No.
I thought an interesting comparison was the way in which Coppola depicts Dracula in Bram Stoker's Dracula and how he gives him a bunch of different characters to play based on time of day,
Mhm.
amount of blood he's been getting, whatever.
Right.
And his voice changes with
Right.
those characters.
the
And
old man,
Yeah.
the young suave,
For sure.
yeah,
and
mustachio
Orlok,
guy.
Skarsgård never does that. He actually, like, even by the end of the film, is still pretty decrepit. He's getting his hair back. Shout out to him. I mean, he is near Turkey, so he
Yeah.
could probably
Yeah,
go
getting
for a
the
hair
plugs.
Yeah.
transplant.
It's kind of
Yeah.
got like a Jude Law thing going on, actually. Yeah.
But yeah, he always keeps the voice. He always keeps the voice, and it's a choice. I love it because I was a voice guy myself.
A pioneer in the field.
But yeah,
I
was
definitely thought of you and all of the rich material you would get out of. You got to bring Orlok to the rewatchables. I
God.
think.
How have we not done some extended bit where you're a voice coach to the stars?
Well, no, I mean, I was joking with Sean the other day that, like, let me ask you, what do you think Orlok's favorite Big East team is? Providence.
This is a big movie for Providence, I gotta say. Really, really a high point.
In addition to the amusing voice, when he does eventually reveal his face, we see that he has a mustache.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A very prominent
Robust.
mustache.
Yeah.
Robust mustache, an impressive mustache. Do you think that's real, or do you think that's some turkey fakery?
That's gotta be turkey fake. They don't come,
I think that
they don't
they
come
just-
in like
you
that.
mean like, do they just? I think everything Skarsgård is doing is like slapped on him.
Yeah.
like, right?
You need to
Mm.
be like literally a police officer in 1987 in Teaneck, New Jersey
Yep.
to grow that mustache. And if you're not, then you can't.
Can't do it.
You have to be in Copland.
Yeah, or a Romanian count. I loved the mustache. That was another moment where I was like, this is a very small choice that changes things very significantly for me. As Eggers said, I think very fairly, he was like, look at a photo of a count in this part of the world in the early 1800s. They have mustaches. It is like a class signifier that they have a kind of manicured facial hair. So
Can I
enjoyed
reveal
that.
something along these lines?
Yes.
The first elective course I ever took in college was this course called The Vampire in Slavic Cultures.
Hell
Really?
yes.
It was just like, oh, this is in the book. There's a class about vampires. I'm locked the fuck in. This is when 30 Days of Night came out. We went as a class to go
See
watch
our
it.
classic.
It was wonderful. Needless to say, the mustache game among all of these would-be and supposed vampires
Mhm.
is off the fucking
I
charts.
can't imagine.
So
Yeah.
clean-shaven Dracula, I get the Count visage. I get that certain versions of Dracula are supposed to be more like appealing and sexy in a way that this one is not. But yeah, if you want to be true to form, he's got to have the stash. He's got to have the thick, somewhat unintelligible accent.
Yeah.
All that stuff really, really worked for me.
Me too. I couldn't think of another mustachioed vampire.
No.
I'm sure there is one, but I couldn't think of one.
Yeah.
Kurt Russell as Wyatt Earp in Tombstone.
He's a bloodsucker for sure. I enjoyed that. And then you also indicated the blood sucking happens essentially from the breastplate in this movie and not from the neck, which apparently is also, I guess, historically accurate insofar as there were, closer to the heart. Yeah. And I think that beast-like tendency that you're talking about too, that animalistic portrayal of Nosferatu is really cool and really great. And the thing is like Dracula is more suave. He's more suave in the Stoker novel too than he is than this figure. You know, Orlok is a ghoul. He is a beast. He is something from an underworld.
Yeah.
And so I like that choice, and I like the sort of like ferocity and speed that he attacks with, and then everything else in the film is so slow moving. So those sequences give you like that, if not that fear jolt, that energy
that
jolt.
pop.
Yeah, that really helps.
Yeah, there's something cool about over the course of the film. Obviously, his psychological, telepathic hold over certain people. The Renfield character, who's Canuck, and then also with the Lily-Rose Depp character, that it makes his physical approaching like that much more terrifying, but also really interesting because you're like, but he's not getting any like that much better looking. Like it's not like he's gonna come and be like charm all of Europe and take it over. It's like there's a very specific mission that he's on, which is to like inhabit this woman.
I think he is grosser than a lot of other Draculas in a lot of different ways. Like the nails. This movie overall, any vampire movie has its share of blood, given the subject matter, but this was like a lot of drooling and dripping and just like goop, a lot of goop.
It is.
More so than I even anticipated.
Also, just lots of attention paid to the sort of like deteriorating nature of his form.
Yeah.
You know, that he has like these sort of like scars and torn
maggots
body
are on
parts
him and stuff.
Yeah, he's gross. He's disgusting. As you would imagine a beast like this would be. He would not look like Bela Lugosi, like fresh out of the sauna, as he does in the original Dracula film. Thematically, as I was watching the movie, and I'm kind of desperate to have themes in my movies and tend to work hard to find them, but I was like, there's a couple of choices that are made in the movie that are really cool. You know, the idea of the plague coming when Orlok comes and the rats come aboard the ship, obviously a reference to the bubonic plague. And I was watching it, and I was like, this is a very cool way of rendering the same panic, like so freshly out of COVID-19. And I asked him about it, and he was like, nope. That was not something I was thinking about at all.
Does he know that there was COVID?
We didn't discuss really the details. And we can talk about that momentarily. But
I imagine him just listening to like Austrian opera all day and not knowing like, does he know Juan Soto is a free agent? Like,
I don't know. Please don't utter his name, the beast's name. The other thing was, one of the things that I think is great about the film, and this is present in the original film, but maybe contemporarily feels even deeper, is it's a great story about women's repression and sexuality and desire, and Lily-Rose Depp as this figure who, like, in our culture alone is already like a deeply sexualized person. The whole movie is oriented around what she wants and feels she needs, but is at war with the expectations of her own femininity at that time.
Yeah.
This is a great idea that powers the movie. And I was like, did you talk to Lily-Rose Depp about that? And he was like, nope. We don't talk about themes. I was like, okay.
I mean,
like,
is
it okay that it's still there? Like, I found it to be.
So, do you think that he's like, honestly, this is like a biblical, mythological, old story that has like self-evident ideas and themes, and my job is to execute those, or is it that like these are my interests? Because I would say that
scholarly
like
approach
these primal feelings, these primal like Northman is about vengeance. It's just like there is just like I will avenge my father. It's one of the oldest stories we've got.
Yeah.
This idea of like sexual desire that is both illicit but also like maddening is like very old idea. So I feel like he's trying to get back to the original sheet music with his works,
yes.
you know?
No, I think that's well put. I just wonder, when you live in modern times,
you're like,
the
hey,
ideas
man,
resonate to this day.
Yeah.
Sure.
I find that, I don't know, were there any other ideas that you kind of felt just below the surface of the movie that resonated for you in any way?
I mean, I think the one you identified about femininity is you almost don't have to talk about it on set. It is that obvious.
Yeah.
Like every time her character complains about anything, it's like, here, let me chloroform you to sleep.
Yeah.
Let me tie you to this bed.
Yes.
It's all kind of right there. But overall, I think it's a lot more about people wrestling with things that are like so far beyond their control and trying to rationalize ways to do it. And maybe the only character who has like a clear-eyed vision through that is Willem Dafoe's, who seems to have a pretty good grasp on everything that's going on and a pretty good grasp of the fact that he are we kind of in spoiler territory now? Is that okay? Like, can basically take the men to get out of the way and run a fake false flag mission off to the side so that the actual work can get done. I thought that was like a really clarifying perspective in this movie. Everyone is like fumbling around, staking bodies that may or may not be vampires, like trying to figure out what the rules are for this version of Count Orlok. Like all this mythology is confounding them. No one has an idea what to do, except the one guy who's like a crazy, kooky doctor who's basically been outlawed by
like
society.
an alchemist. Yeah, right.
Yeah. He was the ball knower of this movie.
Certainly.
I wonder. So thematically, I thought actually that one of the more interesting things that I thought they hammered was the economic anxiety and class stuff, which I don't remember from previous iterations of the story per se.
They Little Women did. You're saying
But just
really
the
brought it
idea
out.
of like him signing away his wife or unknowingly, but then that fight that they have, which is so electrifying, where she's just like, well, show me the gold then, like show me what you sold me for. All the stuff where there's that edge to Holt's relationship to Friedrich, where it's like, you've lent me money, it's okay, you're staying with me, it's okay, but I can always kick you out. And the kind of like the sort of edge to the 19th century version of capitalism that's going on there, and this guy, climbing this mountain to try and get his piece of the world, and only to find the devil up there is I thought was really fascinating to watch Eggers play with, but apparently it wasn't on his mind.
Well, I think it's I like how you described it. And you made me, I think, understand it a little bit better, which is that these things are sublimated so deeply into the structure of the original stories that you don't have to spend too much time overwhelmingly thinking about them. But all the things we're talking about are such modern concerns. The idea of ownership and property and power and the sense of loss there. But like in 1922, in post-war Germany, ownership and land and power and the rebuilding of a social structure is like definitely on Murnau's mind.
Something happened with that?
Yeah, you should read up on it. Maybe his next film will be a war film about vampires. You can watch that and find out.
Holy shit.
That would be good.
Would watch.
That would be good.
That would unite the last couple of big pictures.
I
we've
know.
done
It's
together.
true.
That's our flag.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of criticism of Eggers over the last couple of years that he's a guy who likes to play dress up but doesn't maybe think too hard. And I've been a very staunch defender of the strategy and structure of his movies. But it was funny to talk to somebody who's just like, don't worry about that, dog. this vampire is sick.
But I imagine, you haven't talked to Wes Anderson before.
I never
right?
have. I've never spoken to
I
Wes
would
Anderson.
imagine that if you asked him about Asteroid City and you were like, this is obviously about grief and this is obviously about like the memory of love, and he would be like, it's also about what I think UFOs in Arizona would look like, like, and it's like, he would be like, it's about like, I wanted to make something that was about this particular moment where science fiction and reality kind of merged. And I don't know. I think that I personally get Wes Anderson more than I get Robert Eggers. I think I respect Eggers more than I love him, with the exception of The Northman, which was very meaningful to me as a man who's been trying to avenge his father for quite some time. I felt seen. But I fucking dug Nosferatu, man. It was good.
Also, how much of that do you think is the vampires are sick, don't think about it too hard, and how much of it is leaving the gap?
No, that's what it is. I mean, some filmmakers love to talk about theme, and they love to say like, here's what I was going for with this one.
Right.
I like those conversations. Those are easier for me. It's not as fun to interview a filmmaker and be like, let's talk about theme. And he's like, good luck to you, sir.
Well, maybe he's like, this is Hamlet to me. You know what I mean? Like the themes are like, it's the theme is already, you should know that already because of like the reason why this story still seems to resonate with a lot of people is because it's road tested, you know, so I don't really have to explain it.
Part of that too, like one thing we haven't really touched on is in all of his movies, there's a lot of weird magical stuff happening. Almost none of it is good. It's all like creepy and horrifying and monstrous. And this, I think, playing with this idea that if there is some great power in the universe that is beyond us, we probably don't want to fuck with it too much.
I'm not sure if that's the reading, though, because
don't
I
think
tend
so?
to feel like he most closely associates himself with the characters who get caught up in those worlds.
Well, sure, but they get like wrecked by would-be mermaids and
Or they
shit.
ascend and they find a family of
I guess
witches
that's
together.
true.
You know, like
Yeah.
I
So
tend
you see The Witch as a found family movie.
100%. I'm not even joking.
Yeah,
I really
yeah.
think that that's what that movie is about. Is that like sometimes you're born into a circumstance and you're like, these are not my people. Who
Yeah.
are these people? My parents are aliens. They're God-fearing Catholics living in the newly established lands of America. I am a witch. Where are my witches at? That's what that movie is about. And it's great because a lot of people have an experience like that. So I think you're right that what he shows you in these movies is that those things are very dangerous and powerful,
For sure.
but not necessarily bad. And in fact, like if you want to talk about the ending of the movie,
Yeah.
which I think is great and beautiful and so amazingly shot.
The last 30 minutes of this movie are
It's awesome.
incredible.
It rips.
Yeah, from the moment that the rats are scurrying across the pavers in Germany, I was like, "Oh yeah, he's in his bag." But that final moment, which, as you pointed out, like Willem Dafoe sets up the false flag operation. Everybody moves over here. Nosferatu and Ellen are able to have union. She sacrifices herself ultimately, and he dies on top of her when the sunlight is revealed, executing their plan. And then that frozen image of him on top of her, effectively at the completion of our story.
Yeah.
Mm.
And then having
He's definitely spent. Yeah.
yeah, they both are. They have been drained, so to speak. And that was a pun, guys.
I have
know.
I have a lot of regrets being on this podcast. I had a career before this. You know?
What do you mean? You're only elevating. You're
Yeah.
levitating like Orlok's
He's been
spirit.
arguing about Dyson Daniels for
I know.
like 45
That's the
minutes.
real work.
And then this, a sort of like Renaissance painting of a decaying demon on top of a woman.
It's kind of beautiful.
I know.
It is
it
wonderful.
really is.
You ever
Yeah.
see something in a movie and you're like, I think that was the shot that's been in your head for 15 years. And you're like, I'm going to make the movie so I can do this shot. And that's always really awesome when you see somebody get it. And just like the flowers and everything. It's really breathtaking.
It's really good. This is a really, really good movie. I think I like picking it apart because I'm a little obsessed with his movies. So invariably, I'm like, what about this? What about this? But if you enjoy the Eggers Project, I think you will very much enjoy this. But, Chris said something very funny to me the other day, Rob. He had a very strong take on Dracula.
Okay.
Now, obviously, Nosferatu isn't Dracula, but he basically is.
He's Timu Dracula.
Yes. So what's your take, Chris?
Vampires rule, Dracula drools. Vampires are fucking incredible and just awesome storytelling mechanisms and engines, and also just like fascinating creatures that you can do so much different stuff with. And I would like to say we did it. We're done. Eggers, Coppola, Murnau, we've got them all. You guys don't ever have to do this guy wants to buy a house. I better go to this mountain and sign over my wife's soul to him, and then he comes back in a crate, and then we have to stake him.
What if it's a musical? What if it's a
Again,
comedy?
loving it. I don't know. I just I think that the Dracula character, he's not one of my guys, to quote Mark Maron.
Mhm,
And vampires though are fucking fun and exciting and scary, and it really some of my most watched movies of my life probably are vampire movies.
Mhm.
But there's something about Dracula just misses for me, man.
It's interesting because this is not stopping. Like, just last year, we had The Last Voyage of the Demeter and Renfield.
Right.
We have the Hotel Transylvania movies for kids. We had the Dracula Clays Bang miniseries on Netflix a few years ago. Like, if you go back and look, I just searched for a letterbox list just called Dracula, and I found one and it has 110 films on it.
Good Lord.
And that, of course, that includes all the Browning movies and the Universal horror movies, and it includes all the Hammer films. I mean, Hammer made like 15 Dracula movies in a very short period of time. And it does not stop. People love this story. They love this character. I think it's all the things we talked about. It's the psychosexual nature of things. It's the suavity and the beauty. It's the terror, the elegance combined with like a true monster movie. So it's interesting that you say that, because vampire movies that are not Dracula stories, or maybe I should say even more so, that are not like truly European, tend to be like, whoa, vampires, they're going to fucking explode
Yeah.
everywhere.
These
And there's like
guys
guys
have
with shotguns.
incredible 40
Yeah.
speed.
It's just like, let's make T2, but with a guy who sucks blood. And this is contained to this very elegantly rendered story of a lost time in history.
Yeah.
You know, I don't really have an observation beyond.
I was
do you like Dracula?
I like Dracula fine. I'm not opposed to your overall thesis here, though, which is we know the story. Frankly, Nosferatu feels like it closes the book on it a little bit for me. Like
it does.
I have a hard time feeling like I'm going to watch a Dracula rendition that's going to leave me more satisfied with the story than this.
Interesting.
And so I'm cool with every other vampire story you want to tell, any genre, any time, any variation. You can only see them in mirrors. Maybe they can walk at day now. Whatever it is you want to do, I'm here for that stuff.
Those daywalkers are just they're trouble, man.
They're diabolical.
What makes a great vampire movie for you?
I think it's the setting and setup. So for the top 5 that I have, I think part of it is like the vampires are incidental to the fact that it's a great idea for a movie. It's like, what if we put vampires here? And so I think I can go for vampire movies that are romantic, vampire movies that are action movies, vampire movies that are straight up horror movies, vampire movies that are travel logs. But I think it's got to be everything but the vampire has to be there for me. And then you put the vampires in to twist it up a notch.
Okay. So Sinners is coming out next year, which is Ryan Coogler's new
Yeah.
film, which is not being sold in the teaser as a vampire movie, I don't believe. But as far as I know, is straight up a vampire movie, which I think is in the post-war South.
Wow.
It looks like it based on this
which
teaser.
kind of speaks to the point that you're making, which is like a very cool action movie from Ryan Coogler set in the post-war South, but vampires.
Yeah.
Is great.
Yeah.
Like that's just, I'm in. Like tickets sold. And then we've talked about Chris Nolan's next movie like 300 times together, Chris and I, on this pod recently.
Charlize Theron.
Has she been cast as well?
Yes.
What?
What's the list right now? Where are we?
It's Anne Hathaway, Zendaya, Lupita Nyong'o, Matt Damon, Tom Holland, and Charlize Theron.
Okay.
I think there's someone else that you're missing too. It's an insane group. So he's pulling out.
And
all
how
the
many of
stops.
those people are vampires?
In theory, all of them.
Okay, that's a little cover.
They all
right
fly
there. I'm into
helicopters.
it.
It's going to be an amazing movie. Top 5s. Now I did do this in 2022, which I had completely forgotten about. Van Lathan and I, and here's why I forgot about it. Van Lathan and I did an episode, and by episode I mean an 18-minute conversation about the film Morbius, which is also a vampire movie based on a vampire comic book in the Marvel world that stinks. And we talked about our favorite vampire movies. So I thought, one, I wanted to hear from you guys which ones you like, and then I'll just do 5 more. I'll share the 5 I did in 2022. I'll do 5 more. I made a list of vampire movies, as I often do. There's 300 fucking movies on the list. Like, there's just, if you were into this stuff, there's a lot of fodder. But some of these we've talked about over the years, not all of them. Any thought that you put into the kind of vampire movie that you're looking for in your top 5?
I mean, having just done this with the World War II exercise too, I was struck by the variety of what's available and how much you can draw from. And so like the question of what makes a good vampire movie for me is very hard, because sometimes I do just want vampires getting shot with like stake guns. And sometimes I want moody vampires like finding themselves, like the loneliness of a vampire and the loneliness of the people they prey on is often what draws me to these movies. So I think if there is a theme may be too strong given all the movies I picked, but that's kind of a unifying idea.
I feel like maybe I should become a vampire.
Yeah?
You?
Because like that
You like
loneliness, I like to be up late, I like to just sit in my cave.
Are you sure you're not a vampire?
Well, I certainly have the pallor.
Prove it.
I do have canines.
Oh no.
I do have the classically sharp canine teeth.
What is like the thing blood test equivalent that we could like run on you to prove that you are or are not a vampire? I guess we just got to throw you out in the sun and see what happens.
Your wife ever just to be like, it's me. It's me. I'm a Telluride.
How is Alice doing today, Eileen?
You will make sure there is coffee for me when I get back from Toronto Film Festival.
3 tickets for Moana 2, please. I'm not a vampire, I promise. In 2022, my 5 movies, which I don't think are actually one of them is represented on Chris's list, and I want to let Chris talk about it. So I'll share mine afterwards, and we can just jump into our list. CR, number 5, what do you got?
Twilight.
Yeah, of course.
Edward is the real Dracula. Edward is the guy that I would be like, I get it. I get why she's thrown it all away for this guy.
A soy boy?
Yeah. It's a awesome setting for a movie in Forks, I think it is.
Yeah,
It's
Pacific
called.
Northwest.
Yeah, and the
Yep.
Pacific Northwest. And the idea that like
Oh, you're-
mild cloud cover protects vampires.
That's all they
identity.
need. That's all they need.
I have seen this movie so many times. This came out at a very special time in my relationship to my wife.
Yeah.
It is kind of
Phoebe, should we watch Twilight again?
Are you a Jacob or Team Edward, Phoebe? I love these movies, and there's some diminishing returns as you get to the Breaking Dawn,
Yeah.
but this first one is actually like a really good fucked up teenage love story that then turns silly at like the very end. And I think transposing the idea of this like old ass man who's like, looks disgusting and is like has a psychological hold on you, turning it into Jordan Catalano, and having him just be
A little paler, a
a
little
little
sparklier.
paler, but incredible speed,
Yeah.
incredible dexterity,
Yeah.
and eye coordination off the
Absolutely.
charts.
Hitting the whole like Dalton Connect, right?
Yeah, and I think also for a lot of people out there, this is the vampire story.
Honestly, so
You
weirdly
did not-
enough,
you blanked that.
These movies are bad. I know that they have a huge fan base for people who are roughly 12 years younger than me, but they're
What
not
if I'm
good.
5 years older than you, though?
Yeah, Bob waving from far away. Bob, you love the Twilight movies?
I wouldn't say that I think they're good movies, but I do kind of have a distinct love for them. This is the movie that I've seen in theaters more than any other movie ever because, like,
Hell
when
yeah,
I was
Bob.
in 7th grade, all of my friends were like, we're just going again. Next weekend rolls around, we're going again for like
Yeah,
3 months
yeah.
straight. It was like
Phenomenal.
Endgame before Endgame. So, Chris, I
There was
just want
also
to
like
say,
a very fun Obama core moment of like this and Hunger Games. Everybody was just like, I'm very excited to see Twilight on the screen.
Yep.
Twilight was very good. It was like the book. I want to see the next Twilight movie.
Zillennial culture salutes you, Chris Ryan. You're our new overlord.
I do what I can.
you really do stand up for them. I think I've seen this one the least.
It's never too late to
It's-
rewatch.
It probably is the best one, but like I think the Twilight movies are very underrated in the like you're in a hotel and you need something to throw on in the
Mhm.
background, like it's on TNT watch.
Yeah.
Elite. Like I'm just like, let's watch the fucking softball scene. Let's watch the weird CGI baby. Like
Yeah.
I want all of that stuff. Even more so than I want the original.
Twilight rewatchables would do fucking insane numbers. I'm just saying.
And where would that be happening?
Live from Forks.
Yeah, it's funny. My friends at the New Beverly have started programming it, I think, on an annual basis, and the screenings, just to Bobby's point, just do gangbusters. Apparently, like
Yeah.
people are showing up in costume, and obviously the movie is a huge phenomenon. As an actual movie, I think Taylor Lautner is like a significant part of this film.
Yeah.
Not
Is he a
really.
significant-
No,
Is
no,
he a
no, no,
significant
no.
part of
He's-
this one?
He's not a significant part of the first one. He comes in
That's
as
what I'm
like
saying.
the
We're
He
not
gateway
shows
there
up,
yet.
he gives her the truck.
Yeah. He's just
It's
seeding
the
the,
second
relationship.
one. He's like, I got a haircut and
Yeah.
got swole.
and then he
Yeah.
just gets lapped by Pattinson by the end. It's
Yeah.
just not even
Yeah.
close.
We obviously, I salute Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson,
Of
and I'm
course.
very grateful that they were able to make these films, have success, and now just do weird shit in perpetuity. So they are important.
Robert
number 5 for
Pattinson,
you.
one of the greatest press runs of all time because of this movie. He was just shitting all over the movie and the experience the whole time. He's the GOAT.
An absolute
yes.
lord.
Maybe I was influenced by those quotes that he shared during that time.
I am here to represent the two genders, I guess. We got Twilight in Camp 1.
Yep.
My number 5 is Blade 2.
Love it. Speaking of Guillermo,
Speaking of Guillermo, also stop me if you've heard this before. There's a new breed of vampire guys.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think about, and we need Blade to hunt them for us. That's
Yes.
really what we need to happen. Fully snipesified.
Mhm.
I consider this like the elevated version of the original Blade model. I would like to read for you the names of some of the blood pack that he works with in this movie. The pack of vampires
Please.
who are under his command.
well, there's one that we must salute because he has recently fallen, and we miss
Of
him
course.
dearly. Please feel free.
Lighthammer, Priest, Chupa, and Donnie Yen's Snowman. Really, really something. But Chris Christopherson also a legend in this movie. But like, it's got everything you like from Blade: the vampire clubs, the motorcycle fights, plus vampire government, and that's really where my interests lie.
It's an incredibly fun movie. It is truly the flip side to the Twilight coin. Blade, you don't care.
Blade's cool.
Is it because he's black? You don't like him?
One of these days we're gonna fucking get canceled because you keep.
What do you
gotta
mean?
Push the envelope.
I'm
on
asking you a
those.
pointed question about portrayal in film.
And I'm just going to be the sidekick on McAfee
Yeah.
who's like looking down the barrel of the lens, just like, what am I supposed to do here?
When do we get Mahershala's movie? What the
It's
fuck
not
is
going to
that?
It's not-
happen.
never.
I don't think.
Never.
I don't think it's
I
happening.
thought he was like a major part of the next phase of the MCU. They're just like,
Wasn't it in Eternals when we heard his voice at the end? What movie was
Yeah,
that?
that
Where
was
you
in
hear his
Eternals,
voice at the end? Yeah, that was
Also, Harry Styles was that?
he appeared in the final the stinger of that. Yeah.
All right.
Very cool movie, Eternals. My number 5 that is not my number 5, but is my number 5 is Martin, which is a very cool movie that George Romero made in the 70s. That is very little seen, is much more available now than it was 5 or 10 years ago, but set in Pittsburgh. It's about a young alienated teenager, as so many of these movies are, just like Twilight, who thinks he is a vampire and starts to act like a vampire, but may not actually be a vampire, which is, an interesting psychological study of a moment of change in a person's life. But also, to the point of Eggers's film, there was a lot of vampirism in Romania and Transylvania in the 1800s, and there were men who were incredibly violent and who would rape and
So
murder
what's up
women.
with that? That's real?
That's
Like,
a
what did
real
they
thing.
do?
They believed that they needed the human
Yeah.
flesh
Well,
to
there were.
regenerate.
Let me dig back to my freshman elective education
Get in
here.
there.
So there is that, and then there's also the everyone on literally the other side of our border is a vampire. Like the Roma
yeah.
people
Yes.
over there, they're definitely sucking blood and killing
Right.
people.
Gotcha.
Right.
So that's where it's hard to separate the
That was
mythology
the original
from the history.
build the wall,
Yeah.
as I recall, was
Yeah.
to keep out the
To keep out
vampires.
Who is
Dracula.
like the Steve Bannon of vampires? I'm here from the war room. We got bloodsuckers.
Maybe it was Bram Stoker. I mean, he wrote that influential
Maybe.
bit of literature.
Yeah.
He would have been the Angel Studios.
Steve Bannon
of-
actually
blew
would
the
like
whistle.
fit right into the Nosferatu with the clothes. Like he's got like 7 garments on.
Yeah. Do you think it was between him and Willem Dafoe
Oh
for
my
that
God.
role for
the
the
capes
Alchemist?
were out of control
He was
for
just in
Defoe.
prison, so it didn't work out shooting sketches.
I enjoy Martin. You should check that out. Chris, what's your number 4?
I cheated because we're not ranking Fellini movies here. So these are 2 films at number 4. I think I've seen the 2 of these films combined 500 times. They're my vampire action movie go-tos. John Carpenter's Vampires
Mm-hmm.
and 30 Days of Night. John Carpenter's Vampires is James Woods as the Catholic Church's chief vampire assassin.
Yeah.
He plays a man named Jack Crow.
Is that a lifetime appointment or how do you get in there?
And his sidekick is played by Daniel Baldwin, who plays a man named Tony Montoya. It's fucking awesome. It's set in the Southwest. It's a lot of John Carpenter doing John Carpenter things, and this was actually like his last like successful movie,
Mm-hmm.
pretty much.
That's crazy.
Have you revisited this one
I
recently?
love this movie. We have talked about it before. This was actually, I believe, Van's number 1 when we
Oh, okay.
talked. So he
Wow.
loves this movie as well. Very Van core as well as CR core.
It's just an awesome cable Saturday afternoon movie. 30 Days of Night, I've talked about before. David Slade's night set, like Eternal Barrow, Alaska.
Just an all-time vampire elevator pitch.
And it's just so great. It's like, where would vampires be most at home? At the
Yeah.
place where the sun never comes up for a month. And it's Danny Houston is the chief vampire in this one. It's Josh Hartnett is like the sheriff. And it is so gory and bloody.
yeah.
And the vampires all like move really fast and are super strong. And it's
And they've got like shark teeth.
Yeah,
it's like
that
their
was-
whole mouth is teeth.
That was going to be my question. What is your preference on the vampire teeth experience? Because, Danny Houston in particular, he has like 100 pointy edged teeth.
yeah.
But, the classical Dracula is just the 2.
I think I'm a classicist,
Canines.
honestly.
I like
Like,
to-
I
The
love
two.
the experimentation, but it's a classic.
I'm a
for me.
mid-century modern, Like,
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
like
sure.
something where like you change into something pretty scary is better than just like, oh, I have one long tooth.
Okay, cool. Very cool. Normal stuff. Number 4, Rob.
I'm gonna keep it Guillermo. Kronos.
Mm.
His first movie. Another like really tight vampire story. Very small cast. I think it kind of plays with a different idea of vampirism, which is like everyone is on the search for eternal life throughout these sorts of movies. What if it turns you into a vampire, and the side of vampirism that is actually more of a curse to participate in? So I have a lot of time for that and the sort of like holy grailification of the vampire idea. Also, Guillermo just like has such a knack for the mythology of this stuff and of these worlds. So I have a lot of time for Kronos overall. I think it's just like a really well executed, especially first film, just kind of blew me away.
I haven't seen this in a while, but whatever, the scarab.
It's like
the
a
sort
golden
of-
scarab
Yeah.
beetle that stabs your hand.
Yeah.
And I want to say there's like a little insect inside the
Yes.
golden beetle.
That little creature design is like a an echo signal of what's to come when he gets like $100 million to make a movie.
Yeah.
You know, he's so good at that level of design. It's a really good movie, Kronos. I like that pick. My number 4 is a movie I watched last night for the first time. I was looking around for another Universal film because obviously when the Todd Browning movie in 31 came out, it was a sensation. It vaulted Bela Lugosi to become a huge star. Unfortunately, Dracula dies at the end of that movie, so it's a little hard to make some more movies. This movie is a proper sequel to the original Dracula. It's called Dracula's Daughter. We didn't know in the original Dracula that Dracula had a daughter, but this movie presupposes that she did. And
certainly does.
Dracula's Daughter is really interesting. It is like part of the Universal assembly line chain of films. And this is a vampire movie about a woman kind of coming to grips with her father's death. She believes that if she is able to destroy her father's corpse, that she will be set free from the curse of vampirism.
Can I say that that's not how this stuff works?
Yeah, there's some invented mythology in this
yeah.
movie, but the movie, which is directed by Lambert Hillier, has great tone, atmosphere, very unsettling kind of movie. Very short, it's only 71 minutes, and it is very clearly a crypto lesbian drama and one of the original portrayals of gay love between two women in a movie. And there are a couple of other examples of this. I just watched another Val Lewton movie like a few months ago that also features this kind of relationship. But if you look at it through that prism, it's just another great reading of like what you can do with a vampire movie and the obsession that we see between Orlok and Ellen in the movie is the same between these two women in this story. One, a kind of like raven-haired seductress, and another, a kind of blonde innocent. So very cool movie.
I mean, it's actually a really good segue to the number 3 for both of us.
Oh yeah, fire away.
Yeah.
Only Lovers Left Alive?
Yeah. Jim Jarmusch's 2013 movie with Tilda Swinton and Tom Hiddleston. Maybe my favorite Tom Hiddleston performance.
Honestly, the role they were both meant to play.
Yeah, and
they're so good in it.
What if the two coolest people literally of all time were vampiric lovers who lived through centuries and like fought and left each other and came back to one another? And it's this moment in Jim Jarmusch's career where he kind of gets some mainstream notoriety for a couple of his indie films and then starts to work with bigger actors and then takes on this project that's essentially like taking his tone and applying it to big genre movies. So Westerns, vampire movie, zombie movie. And this is one of my favorite films by him, but is really like the central sort of like relationship between Swinton and Hiddleston is so fucking awesome.
Yeah.
And it's just like, if you haven't seen this movie, I honestly recommend this the most out of all of the movies we're going to talk about today.
It has such a cool musical sensibility too, because he's like, obviously this musician has lived hundreds of years writing a bunch of mostly funeral dirges. Like, I mean, it's almost like fuzz rock.
Yeah,
I guess
it's like what if the White Stripes were vampires, kind of. Yeah.
And I think it's set in Detroit, which is probably the only vampire movie that operates that way. I think it has a couple things going for it that other vampire movies don't. One, this idea of blood as almost like a hallucinogenic drug, more so than a life force. Like they do need it to survive, but it gives them a high.
It's very much a stand-in for heroin.
Oh,
like
completely.
It is so heroin chic, the whole movie, and it's very clearly mapped onto what if you just sat around and listened to Scott Walker and Lou Reed 80s records? Like that's basically what they're doing in the movie. So it's very, very, very cool.
And also the part that because it is in Detroit, in Decay, I think it's as much a movie about like what vampires make of us as as opposed to what we make of them or what they make of each other. It's like, what do you do with an eternal life when you see humans just fucking up everything that they touch?
Speaking of fucking up everything they touch, my number 3 is, I don't know if this is one of my favorite vampire movie, but it's a very cool film that is somewhat related to Martin, which is called Trouble Every Day. It's a Claire Denis movie from 2001, stars Vincent Gallo and Beatrice Dahl. And it is once again about a movie about people who think that they are vampires and who wreak fucking havoc. And there is like an extraordinary kill in the middle of this movie. It's related to another movie that was on my previous list in my mind, which is called The Addiction, which was an Abel Ferrara movie starring Lily Taylor in the 90s. And they both have these kind of centerpiece murder sequences that are very unnerving, but weirdly very sexual. The Addiction is a little bit more of a parable about AIDS. Trouble Every Day is something else.
I feel like the Larry Fessenden movie Habit, which is really cool, but fits into this as like a trinity of
absolutely independently made using that genre Trojan horse to explore something bigger in the culture. But Trouble Every Day is a very, very cool and kind of mystifying movie at the end when you get to it. And Vincent Gallo like I'm not spoiling it. He just kind of decides like, okay, I think I'm done with that. And they like get on the road and just like, so you just had an interregnum period of your life in which you were a vampire.
If you told me Vincent Gallo actually believed that, I would believe that.
It does seem believable. Okay. Number 2. Chris.
I got Near Dark, which is Catherine Bigelow's Southwestern travelogue about a couple, like basically a Bonnie and Clyde Badlands kind of situation. Where this couple is wreaking havoc throughout the Southwest and falls in with a group of like traveling vampire criminals. Lance Henriksen, Bill Paxton, just like the James Cameron, Catherine Bigelow all stars are in this, and I think it kind of has. It's the perfect marriage of like a director with this very high style and this very hard genre thing, but then it's like. Let's actually like imbue this onto like a real world situation. It's just a fantastic film.
I'm not up on this at all. I gotta catch up.
This was my number 1 when we did the list originally. This movie is in desperate need of a 4K restoration. They should put this movie back in theaters. They should put it on physical media. It's very hard to. I don't know if it's hard to find. You probably could just rent it.
Yeah,
but
I think you can get it, but it's not a great print.
Not a great. Yeah, not exactly. Just a rip roaring movie, and then when it's not, is a very ethereal coming of age story.
Yeah.
Great movie. Okay, number 2, Rob.
Yeah, I think we share a number 2.
We do share a number 2.
Bram Stoker's Dracula, which I think has a lot of in common with Nosferatu in a way. Like, I believe in rewarding vision with a list like this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is a movie that has a clear sensibility. I think it deserves placement on production design and costuming, and Gary Oldman going so fucking hard every second that he's on screen in this movie. An absolute style icon. You were talking about the various Draculas that we see. I prefer steampunk little blue glasses. That's kind of my preferred Dracula mode. I just think it's a really cool Dracula adaptation in which he almost gets to be like kind of a Wolfman version of a vampire.
Yes.
At a
Also
point.
a kind of beast. Yeah.
Definitely more of a beastie vibe. And plus you got Keanu in there cooking too, getting worked over by Dracula's brides. I think it's just a really fun time.
Yeah. I revisited this movie for Megalopolis, and I was just blown away. And I probably hadn't seen it in 20 years, and I was just blown away by the level of craft that's going on.
It's a classic. We didn't know how good we had it kind of movie.
Yeah. Also, one of the great movies one of the great texts that people wrote about at the time when it came out, because there was a lot of access to this production. There was a lot riding on this, as is with many Coppola films, and just the controversial about like casting Winona and Keanu in these parts that probably required like British theatrical presence, and it's an awesome movie to go back.
I think Winona's pretty good. I mean, Keanu is kind of famously not good.
He's struggling.
He's like, whoa,
that looks like a vampire. Shit.
But that character is struggling. Like that's the thing. I almost don't mind it. You know,
I
he's
think
in over
totally
his head.
credible. Yeah. Okay, Chris, number 1.
My number 1's Lost Boys. Joel Schumacher movie from the 80s starring Jason Patric and Kiefer Sutherland and Corey Haim and Corey Feldman. This is, I think for me, gets at the thing that like is the young at heart part of my fascination with vampires, which is like they just seem cool and how dangerous that must be if you actually like let it play out. This is one of the great settings of any movie, which is this Northern California beach amusement park town. So most of it takes place on this boardwalk where the kids all have jobs or hang out and ride motorcycles. And a gang of vampires are like marauding around this town. And I don't want to give too much away about what happens, but a lot of it is about fitting in as a teenager and trying to figure out your identity. Are you a vampire or a vampire killer? And it's fucking amazing. It's such a great movie to rewatch over and over again. I find myself delighted every time I watch it. And this is probably the vampire movie that hit me right as I was coming into consciousness about what they even were. So it's like you always remember your first love.
I like this movie a lot too, and is the perfect setting for Joel Schumacher's
whole deal.
Like visual schlock.
The saxophone
obsession.
scene.
Yeah. You know, his like sense of, started out as a costume designer, and his sense of staging is always really good. And his like scripts and idea of plot mechanics are always like quite bad. But in this world, just like honestly in the Batman movies, it's like let it rip. That's the whole point of the Joel Schumacher movie is we're not trying to make a serious work of art here. We're trying to have a fun movie. So great pick. Rob, what's your number 1?
My number 1, someone here must respect Swedish cinema.
This is actually probably the right pick.
I legitimately didn't put this on my list because I knew you would.
I take that as a high compliment. Let the right one in.
Yeah.
Must be on this list. There are not a lot of feel-good vampire stories out there. I would say Only Lovers Left Alive kind of gets close.
Sure,
It's
yeah.
pretty bleak.
Yeah.
Like,
Especially the end, yeah.
Attempted suicidal bullets are made in that movie.
Mhm.
So it's like, it's a bit of a heavier watch overall. But this is about like two lonely kids finding each other. And I think plays on the vampire myth in an interesting way. Like, yes, it is. It holds no punches ultimately and gets very, very violent. I think the fact that it doesn't hold anything back is what makes it so good, and what makes it so that when you do see a little vampire kid and a little human kid doing Morse code through the wall at each other,
Yeah.
like it's just so endearing. And I think ultimately using that, in the same way you were saying as vampirism or vampires as a way of like fitting in or finding your boys.
Mhm.
This way, it's like, how do you stand up to a bully? And one answer is make friends with a vampire.
What is your take on the Matt Reeves remake?
It's pretty good.
I just don't. It's one of those like, what's the point?
Mm-hmm.
A little bit.
It's very faithful, but I thought it was pretty cool. I thought Richard Jenkins was really good in it.
The cast is unreal.
Yeah. This is another example, though, of what we were talking about before, where a Swedish apartment like complex in dead winter is like an awesome place to.
So cool.
Also, just very hard to make a credible film about the emotional connection between two 10-year-olds.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like a hard movie to make, and both of the actors in the Alfredson version are so incredible, especially the young girl is just such a great actress. It's a wonderful movie. I'm glad you picked it.
Because there's kids too, there's also the dimension of like what it's like to be the caretaker for a kid vampire, which is,
that's like such a great little wrinkle in the story that it's like, what if Renfield was your babysitter?
Yeah.
It's just a super good idea. So my number one on this list is Fright Night, which is a movie that I also hadn't seen in a long time, and I rewatched during the spooky season. And it's just like such a fun movie, and I had forgotten, to your point about Eggers being very excited to make a movie gloopy. Like the practical gross out effects in Fright Night are amazing. The final 40 minutes in Chris Sarandon's house, where like he's transforming into like a bat demon, and they're killing the other vampires and the familiar in the house, and his death, like all that stuff is so wild. But it's also what you're saying, which is just like, it's a cool teen comedy about a guy who's trying to get laid and also like is super into a TV show, and he meets the host of the TV show and they go on an adventure together. Plus Chris Sarandon wanting to kind of like fuck everybody's mom and also drink their blood. It's just a super fun movie.
The remake's not bad.
It's pretty good. I mean,
Tennant? David Tennant's the vampire? Or is that a different?
Colin Farrell.
Colin Farrell.
Yeah,
and
Colin
Anton
Farrell.
Yelchin. Yeah.
It is pretty good. I got onto rewatching it because I had rewatched Child's Play on a plane, which I think I talked about, and I was like, Child's Play is a very, very good film. And Tom Holland, the director, who's like pretty underrated, I think. This was his first movie as a director, and he wrote a bunch of stuff like Cloak and Dagger before this.
Before Spider-Man, you mean?
Not that Tom Holland.
Oh, it's unfortunate.
Tom Holland as a
what if he's a
spermatozoa.
vampire,
Well, that's everlasting.
I haven't seen him
youth.
age a day.
That's a really, really good point. That's our list. My list from 22 was Salem's Lot, the Tobe Hooper miniseries, which was recently remade, not very successfully. From Dusk Till Dawn, which I fucking love.
Absolutely.
The Addiction, which I just mentioned. The original Dracula from 31, which is still great and still plays really well. It does not feel like an old movie at all. And then Near Dark, as I mentioned.
I'll throw out the film version of What We Do in the Shadows.
Definitely.
And the
Very
TV
funny.
version, which might have this point eclipse the film version.
Mm-hmm.
They just did a college basketball March Madness episode of What We Do in the Shadows.
Providence. Any other honorable mentions? Anything else you want to shout out before we go to Robert Eggers?
I mean, since we were talking so much Nosferatu, I think the Herzog Nosferatu is kind of off to the side a little bit. Thirst. Blood for Dracula, I really like.
Mhm.
The
That's the
original
Paul Morrissey
Buffy movie.
Oh, A Girl Who Walks Alone at Night, right?
Yep, that's a great movie.
And similar to your like thinking you're a vampire phenomenon, I actually really like Vampire's Kiss a lot. Not really about being a vampire, but about thinking you're a vampire.
As we know, you are cage pilled.
Sure.
And so it is one of the crazy cage texts.
It really breaks open the whole case for us.
Whose list do you think Robert Eggers would like the most?
I genuinely think he would want to throat punch all three of us. So, with that in mind, let's go to my conversation with Robert Eggers. Robert Eggers is back on the show. Rob, how are you?
Great. Happy to be here.
When did you first see The Murnau? Nosferatu? Do you remember?
Yep, 9 years old. My mom helped me acquire a VHS. We had to like mail order for, and and it just really stuck with me. I'd seen Bela Lugosi, the Bela Lugosi version, and a couple of the Christopher Lee versions. But something about Max Schreck's performance and the simple fairy tale telling of the Dracula story, the haunting atmosphere. It really stuck with me.
What did your parents think when their 9-year-old was really into German silent cinema?
Status quo, like I was into weird stuff, but my dad was a Shakespeare professor, and my mom had a kids theater company, so it was like a household where that kind of thing was perfectly fine.
How did you feel it manifesting? I know you wrote a stage play that was sort of an adaptation. Like, did you, when you were 9, were you like, I want to make the things that I'm seeing?
Yeah, no. I think I definitely thought about the idea of being a film director as a kid. But yeah, I did a lot of theater growing up, and I had the opportunity to do a senior directed play, and I thought maybe I'll do Nosferatu, and as a silent film on stage with black and white costumes and black and white sets. And then I said that maybe it was dumb. And my friend Ashley Kelly Tata, who's now a prominent theater and opera director, she said, no, that's a cool idea. And so we directed it together. And then it was seen by this guy, Edward Langlois, who had the only cool theater in Southern New Hampshire that was doing Duchess of Malfi and Sam Shepard instead of My Fair Lady. And he invited us to do a more professional version of it as his theater. And it changed my life and cemented the fact that I wanted to be a director. So before I knew that I wanted to make a movie of Nosferatu, Nosferatu sort of symbolically was my primal narrative that made me want to do what I do or something, so
back then
to some extent.
Did you find yourself intellectually disassembling it when you were younger and thinking about why you liked it?
Of course not.
Yeah.
I can barely do that now, even though that's what I'm being asked to do all day long every day. But obviously I had to explore that when I did approach writing a screenplay, because how do I make it my own? Why do I want to do this? And I think what was nice about the Galeen screenplay, that adaptation that is Murnau's film, is that simpler fairy tale structure has a lot more enigma and a lot more question marks. So it's a framework where I can, put in what I'm the most interested in, and I wrote a novella in trying to figure this all out, to embellish Ellen's backstory and childhood and understand Orlok, and create a vampire mythology based on folklore and occult that sort of had some consistency to flesh out other characters, and that was the first step in sort of making this movie a reality, and that happened 9 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, so I think we talked on the phone in 2016.
Sure.
And you were going to do it, or you were thinking about doing it, and it was after The Witch, and it had been discussed, and obviously it didn't happen for a variety of reasons, but do you think that the version you would have made then would have been significantly different than where you are now?
It was only because of my lack of ability, but not because of what I wanted to do. The movie hasn't really changed since then too much. The script has gotten tighter and gotten better and less expositional and whatever, but it is the same movie,
What abilities have changed in that time?
I've gotten better at making films. I've matured as a human being. I've grown closer and more fluid with my frequent collaborators. So many things. I think the Northman was such a tall order, and it was way too big for my britches, and it was like trial by fire, and after that I came out thinking like I know how to direct a movie now. Like I'm not convincing people that I know how to make a movie in theory. Like I actually know how to direct a film. So it was great when Nosferatu finally happened to go into it with more confidence. Not to say that we didn't challenge ourselves as filmmakers. We all of my team were trying to deliberately bite off a little more than we can choose, so that so that we can stretch ourselves and get better, and also stretch further on the next one. But yeah, it was a good time to make the film.
Is there a big anxiety of influence when there are several iterations of a story that come before? Like, will you look at them or not look at them when you're preparing to make it?
I looked at every Dracula and vampire movie. I would say that there's definitely some quoting of the Todd Browning film, a little, but other than that, like not a ton. And the movies that were more influential to this movie, aside from Nosferatu, were not Dracula movies. But I watched the Herzog version and the Coppola version a lot as a young person. So in the 10 years of trying to make this, I deliberately didn't watch them. I know that that there are that those influencers are there. They could not be. I watched those movies a zillion times when I was younger. So, but I did want to try to deliberately distance myself from them, as they were the more recent, strong versions of the story. But at the end of the day, you have to respect what came before you, and while I want to do my own thing, as much as like the makeup design, the costume design of Orlok is meant to be radically different, but I also have like the fingers, the shape of the skull. There are certain things like the hump back. Like there are certain things that I also wanted to acknowledge, and I think, me, Bill Skarsgård, David White, the prosthetics designer, and interestingly enough, Robin Carolyn, the composer, I think were the people who felt the most weight of like, oh my God, we're doing Nosferatu. But when you're there, you just have to kind of like let go and be, or you're gonna fail.
There's a very surprising name in the credits. Chris Columbus is a producer on this movie.
Yes, Chris Columbus of Home Alone and Harry Potter and Mrs. Doubtfire fame was the main creative producer on the film with his daughter Eleanor. But yeah, Chris and Eleanor have a company called Maiden Voyage that like they're the main thing they do is support first and second time filmmakers. And on The Witch, when we sort of were doing posts with Monopoly money, they came in to help finish that movie. And Chris has been a mentor ever since. But on this film, Chris and Eleanor were there every single day by the monitor, on set for all of prep. And Chris was, we are very different filmmakers, obviously, but having one of the masters of Orthodox Hollywood storytelling being there as an advocate, it was incredible. And also, he was there as a great voice to sort of counter my arty-farty inclinations, and I don't think, I'm certain the film wouldn't, be what it is, hopefully good, without Chris Columbus's input.
Was any of that instinct around, forgive this word specifically, but like a kind of commercial sensibility that you hope could be suffused within the things that you're doing?
No. I mean, I would say no. But I would say that just, in Jared and I do these long, unbroken shots. And in doing that, there is a slight rewriting of the script and streamlining things so one thing can lead to another so that we don't have to put in edits. There are scenes with shot reverse shot, like editing's great, but often this is what we're doing.
Mhm.
And Chris would be combing through our storyboards and saying, where's this story beat? Where's that story beat? You missed it.
Mhm.
It's in your script. You have to articulate it. It's not enough for them to say the line. We have to see it visually, and that care was incredibly helpful.
That's really interesting. I mean, The Northman feels like this incredible exercise in the freedom of open space, and this movie is sort of the opposite. It's very contained. It's a lot of small rooms.
I think audiences will feel how they feel. I'd feel like these oneers are a little more invisible in this movie. Like in The Northman, it's a little bit like, look what we're doing, and which sucks, but it is what it is. But
it doesn't. Why does it? So how do you say it sucks?
I mean, I just when you don't want to announce your bravura,
I see.
Or I mean, sometimes it's fine too, but I think in general, I wouldn't want that. And I think that a lot of times in this film, you don't even notice that you're watching a oneer. It just kind of happens.
That's definitely true.
And I think some of that is, because of the chamber scenes. And this isn't revolutionary stuff we're doing. You can see it in 1940s Sherlock Holmes B movies, which and they're doing it just to make their day, but it is, I think it's a nice for me, as an audience member, I find it more in a little more engaging, and with my period world building and everything, the fact that you're just kind of sucked into this shot that keeps on going, unconsciously, you don't feel the artifice of the cut. That said, the scenes that are shot reverse shot or whatever, working with a great editor like Louise Ford, that also has its own emotional value in seeing face. But the other thing about the oneers that I really like is making them, because what happens is that all the actors are dependent on each other. They're all, dance partners, but so is the dolly pusher, and so is the focus puller, and so are the carpenters who have to move walls that are hinged to get the camera out, the walls out of the way to move the camera in the middle of the shot. And so there's a tremendous amount of focus on set. And I also think that everyone feels like they're making the movie. Everyone feels collaborative. People aren't just sitting around waiting for the next setup. Everyone's engaged. And that is also just an enjoyable way to work.
Did you know that before The Northman, that creates I guess more of a team atmosphere?
Yeah, I mean, we had done shots like that on the Lighthouse and to a lesser extent on The Witch too. But it was something that we were continuing to work on and explore.
As a movie watcher, do you like having a consciousness of the filmmaker making moves? How do you?
I mean, the best movie, you're just watching it, and obviously it's hard for me. It's hard for me because I make movies not to be into mindsets. But if there is a movie where I'm not thinking about the filmmaking, then I know that it's extra great. Sometimes, I'll watch a movie and just be like, wow, the camera works so awesome. But I'm not even paying attention to the story. That's probably not good. Even if it's enjoyable. But but obviously I watch movies repeatedly. So there can be a great movie that you get sucked into. And obviously, I'm not blind to the fact that of how they're shooting it to some degree, but then I'll watch it 2 times, 3 times, however many times I need to learn what I need to learn from it.
You said there were other movies that were not vampire movies that were meaningful influences on this. What were some of those?
I mean, the primary one would be Jack Clayton's The Innocents, shot by Freddie Francis, who also shot The Elephant Man and directed many Hammer horror movies. And The Innocents is probably the best ghost story and ever, like ghost movie. I'd say yeah. Okay, sure. And certainly one of the finest gothic horror movies. And if you pay attention to the camera work, it's very restrained, it's very elegant, it's and it tells the story without doing more than it needs to.
What about the creature design? You mentioned obviously it's a collaboration with the actor, makeup effects. There's even in the trailer, there's the restraint with not showing how Bill looks creates a sense of anticipation. Did you guys feel like a certain pressure to do something new or different or elevate what the monster would be?
Look, like Max Schreck created this iconic thing, and Kinski did his version of it, and then Defoe does the Shadow of a Vampire, and it's a comedy. But I think we needed to do different, even though again, I do some things to acknowledge Shrek, and his makeup that he designed himself, by the way. But I think in order this is supposed to be a horror movie, right? And obviously vampires have over the course of the 20th and early 21st century become more and more romanticized, and Kinski's sad vampire to Gary Oldman's anti-hero vampire, and then climaxing with Edward Cullen's sparkling vampire where there's no threat at all. And it's great. The pliability of the vampire is awesome, and I like Blade, but this is a horror movie, and the vampire needed to be scary again. So obviously, given my approach, that means going back to the folklore and understanding why were people actually afraid of things that they thought were real vampires. And so the folk vampire is a walking corpse, closer to a zombie visually. And so then I ask myself, what does a dead Transylvanian nobleman look like? And this is my best effort on as far as the facial features, the hair style, the attire, the whole thing.
There are a couple of really striking things about it that I want to ask you about. One is the voice. And I don't think I heard when you and Guillermo were talking. I don't know if you talked about that at a certain point. What the decision that
I wrote Orlok to have a very deep, powerful, booming voice, but also a sort of a pained breath, because he's decayed and it's almost if I guess he's in a static version of some kind of decay, but it sounds like it's getting worse every time he breathes. And that was in the script, and something I developed with Bill. And he also worked with Elsa Eunice Dotter, who's an opera coach, which is an opera singer, but she coached him to lower his voice an octave for the role.
I didn't think that it was digitally manipulated in any way, but it does have that sense of it is from another existence. It doesn't feel natural.
Yeah, I think basically the only things we did to it is amplify it, because obviously having that not be your normal register, he couldn't do it quite to that volume on set, but it's the same sound.
The mustache.
Find a picture of a Transylvanian nobleman without a mustache. Just so if you don't want to Google, just picture Vlad the Impaler.
And so, I guess talk to me about that. We have talked about a version of this in the past, but this sort of desire to have verisimilitude to something that may be myth or occult, finding a truth in something that may not be real, and why that is important.
But it becomes more the more the physical world and the mindset of the period is articulated, specifically, with quote unquote accuracy, which is impossible, but my best interpretation of that, the more you can buy into the metaphysical things like a vampire existing, I think. At least that's what I've been doing the past 4 times.
Trying to get closer and closer to that.
Oh, I mean, I'm just doing the same thing. I don't know if I'm getting closer.
Well, like you made there's a couple of other choices that I thought were interesting, like the staking being metal and the rationale for some of that.
It's all of this comes from the research, and it's like, obviously, Anglo authors said vampires must drink blood from the throat because like that's a good place to drink blood from, but in the folklore, like if they are drinking blood at all, which sometimes they don't, sometimes they strangle their victims, sometimes they fuck their victims to death, like it's very often from the chest because of old hag syndrome, like waking dreams where you feel that pressure on your chest. So that's something that I went with. And yeah, and very often in Transylvania, it's iron stakes, cold iron is what you would want to use, and staking them through the navel rather than the heart. And the origin of the staking goes back, before these kind of Eastern European folk vampires, like many of the bog bodies in Scandinavia and the British Isles were staked with hazel staves, and the idea is to like keep these fuckers there.
Yeah,
like these are malevolent people who we want to be kept in their grave.
Yeah,
stake them down.
Did you see the new Guy and Madden movie?
I haven't.
The bog bodies play
a
role in that
seen
movie.
It. Yeah,
it's funny that that's happening at the same time as this. Obviously, like you were thinking about this long before, but the movie really reads as a kind of like a COVID pandemic kind of a film too, because of the plague and the that's
I mean that's
part of the original, obviously, but
it just sort of the interesting timing.
Had you thought about it at all when you were making it? Because there's like a kind of paranoia in a town about what is really happening.
Well,
here.
I mean, I mean, but of course I wrote it before COVID. But interestingly, the More Now film came out a couple of years after the Spanish flu, and this is coming out a couple of years after COVID. I mean, actually, pre-COVID, like I had a lot of the townspeople wearing face coverings in the script, and I took that out because it just felt like too. Like I was trying to say something about COVID, which I wasn't, but it's going to resonate anyway.
How does that strike you when like someone reads something into a movie that was not your intention, but like could be supported by?
It's great. I mean, I think, I don't make movies with a message. I don't think about like, I want to tell like a feminist horror story, whatever. I like it's not how I work. I just try to be in the world. But obviously I don't live in a vacuum, and so like things are just going to come into it that hopefully work with people. Also, when you're dealing with fairy tale, myth, fable, folktale, these are archetypal stories which can be read in many different ways, and that's why people keep staging Oedipus and keep reading Hansel and Gretel,
It's hard not to watch the movie though and see coherent themes. Like even if I don't know if your intention was not to make Ellen like a representation of something about how women's sexuality is repressed, for example.
Yes, in a 19th century context, but then people can again, it's for me, it's like with this film, for her, it's in a 19th century context, but like it doesn't mean it doesn't resonate for people today. Just say like, the woman's voice not being heard, but there are other ways that you can read it too, I mean, people have been talking about the election and this movie. Which was certainly not anything that
who was who in the story,
right? I mean, I'm not even going to go there, but Yeah.
I don't have any election questions on
Sure.
my docket here for you today. I was curious about what your conversations were like with Lily-Rose Depp, because she's asked to do quite a bit, both physically and in terms of the typical performance. Will you talk about like themes like that are in the story? Do the actors want to hear those things, or they just want to hear about the world that you've built and kind of executing on that?
I mean, it happens particularly in theater, but I don't know why you would want, which I love, and my approach in many ways is similar to a theater approach, but I don't know why it would matter for you to know the themes. Like, does it, as an actor, like, what do you, because that's not your job. Your job is to be in the moment. Like, I think some of the problems with like the Stanislavski approach is that you are like thinking about the arc of your performance, which again, in theater, like it kind of makes sense because you're doing a lot of this work, but on screen, you just need to, I mean, I also think in theater too, but particularly on screen, you just need to be there in the moment.
Yeah.
And so like, did we talk about themes? Like maybe, probably, but mainly it's like, okay, like how do we map and choreograph Ellen's physical arc of all of these different like hysterical poses and possession fits and things? How do we make them build? How do we make them grow? How do they evolve? What do they say about where she is? But that's sort of, myself and Marie Gabrielle Rodi, the choreographer, need to be like the sort of God figure overseeing that, and Lily needs to learn it and then be there, and the performance is so raw and so powerful, and but then where there is that kind of attention to detail in like all the story beats is also like interpreting a text. And like, obviously Lily's getting all this incredible praise for her physical performance, as she well should, because it is incredibly challenging, incredibly tiring physically and mentally. And, and I should say, like, a lot of people have wondered if this stuff is CG enhanced, but this is what she is physically doing. But also, she does these two, like, she does all kinds of stuff, but there's two long monologues. One of them is a disjointed memory of her childhood. Another one is a telling of a dream. And those monologues are really hard to do. Those are crash and burn. Like, those are kinds of auditions you never want to like audition with, monologues you never want to audition with because they're so tricky to like make a connection. And she does them, very powerfully with a lot of nuance.
Can you tell me a little bit about scares? Because your last couple of movies were not defined by scare moments. This is more in like the traditionalist horror sense. There's some scary moments in the Lighthouse, but there's
no, I mean, not really.
You have like a mermaid reveal or something,
sure,
like a couple things.
A little scary, yeah.
But this movie, you first of all, right out of the chute in the kind of cold open, we are terrified.
Well, I mean, it's there's a reason why those horror movies often have that, like that kind of scare in the beginning, because then you're like concerned about what else could happen for the rest of the film, and adds like a degree of tension, free of charge. And but I think approaching Nosferatu, which in many ways, obviously there's horror films before Nosferatu, but in many ways invented the horror film. I felt like we needed, like, I think when Hutter threw the lid off the sarcophagus in 1922, that was a jump scare. So here, even though I've often derided jump scares, was I have like a handful of them in the movie, but I do feel that they are supporting the story. They all move the story forward. They're not just like a set piece for the sake of it. But also, we know they're coming. And that's okay.
But as a fan of yours, I was not expecting them, and so when I got them, I probably was even more scared than I normally would, because I didn't think that you were going to do them.
Cool.
That's just my personal experience.
That's cool. I mean, it was they're hard to do. I mean, I respect James Wan even more, like having like tried my hands at it, because they are
He's
hard to do.
particularly good.
He's very good.
Yeah,
They always work, and it is a real craft, and it is hard to do.
I wanted to ask you about one thing that isn't in the film that is in the Murnau original that feels related to my favorite little sequence in the movie, which is that the casket's being elevated onto the back of the wagon in the original film, but then the sort of carriage scooping up Nicholas Hoult's character. I feel like they're sort of like almost in conversation with each other, but how much did you think about what to include? Because that's such a magical moment in the Murnau film. Did you want to not repeat certain things that felt like kind of critical to what he was doing versus introducing your own versions of those things?
I mean, I think the vampire looks a little ludicrous, like running around carrying his coffin under his arm, like, and so I didn't want Bill to have to do that, and so Simon McBurney like brings the sarcophagus like on the skiff to the manor house, and that was fine with me. And then the carriage sequence was something that was really fun to do, but I decided, wouldn't, instead of Dracula being in disguise as the carriage driver, maybe there would be no driver.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's more interesting. Certainly harder to shoot.
Yeah, can you tell me about it? Because it seemed hard to do.
I mean, it was like we just basically built a carriage where we could hide the driver inside. So, but whatever.
Okay. Are you happy with it? I feel like every time I talk to you at the end of a movie, and you're like, I'm not quite like totally satisfied.
There's always things that are never going to get there, but I've never. This is the film that out of the gates I am the most pleased with. It was the first time in post-production that I didn't want to just like jump off a bridge every day. I'm always very engaged in post-production. Like, I know a lot of great directors who like go away for 2 weeks, check in, I'm there every day in the edit room, like really involved. But on all my other films, I've just been like just also writing the next thing and trying to like distance myself from the movie. And here I didn't feel that. I was still going home, watching 1 or 2 horror movies every night, thinking like, how can I make it better? It was very like engaged with it the whole time.
Is it very close to what the storyboards were and what you expected? Did anything meaningfully change in post-production?
No.
You wouldn't see a movie and be like, actually, we should do it like this, or I should reorder this, or this.
I think that obviously some things change, and obviously like it's Louise Ford like doesn't get enough credit because of the Wanners and because her best work is invisible.
Mm-hmm.
And she has the tremendous challenge of when me and Jaren's clever shots don't work, and then we have to like get ourselves out of the corner that we've painted ourselves into. And also because the shots are so designed and every edit is like designed, like we have to also, if we get out of a shot early or whatever, or lift a scene, it has to look like it was designed to go there. So it can be very hard, and also the other thing is that these Wanners, when there's a lot of characters in them and they take up a big important scene, you can be sitting with one of them for months and then realize, like maybe we need to use take 7 instead of take 8, and all of a sudden like the whole movie changes. It is interesting, but there wasn't any major things on this one. There was no additional photography. There was just sort of honing and finessing.
Are you gonna keep making movies? I always feel like you're like get to the end of one and you're like kind of like I don't know.
No.
Okay.
I mean, I desperately hope people keep letting me make movies. like, yeah, I love it. To
You're writing right now?
I've got a lot of stuff going on. I always have to have a lot of things going on because you never know what's going to work. I mean, this didn't happen several times and it happened.
Mhm.
Like, I absolutely thought I was going to be making not this
Mhm.
as my next film, and here we are.
Do you have any other Nosferatu-esque like totems of film history that you are interested in digging your teeth into? I'm sorry, that's a bad pun.
No, I was just making a weird face because like a few people have asked me this. I mean, there are things that I would like to do that are famous properties, but like, should they be done? I don't know. Should this have been done? I don't know. But
Well, I feel like vampires by their nature are kind of iterative. So like having the reverence for the history and like watching all the Hammer movies, if you know it, then make a new one.
yeah, I mean, Robin, the composer, was like, when this was finally like gonna happen, we were at the pub, and he's like, well, he's British, so excuse the slang, but he's like, well, mate, no one can say you didn't fucking think about it hard,
Yeah, that seems true. Rob, we end every episode of the show by asking filmmakers what's the last great thing they have seen. Could be old or new, could be anything.
I'll just I'll spare you from my Russian silent cinema and just say that I really enjoyed The Substance.
Can you tell me why? I've been very interested in your take on that movie.
I have some good friends who I respect who like really didn't like it and had very lucid reasons for it, but I just, it was just incredibly sound. Like it the whole thing worked and was of a piece, and it was like well crafted and very enjoyable and like good performances, and I just enjoyed it.
That would make for an interesting double with your movie.
Sure.
Transformations. Robert Eggers, thank you.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you to Robert Eggers. Thanks to Chris and Rob. Thank you to Jack Sanders. And thanks to our producer, Bobby Wagner, for his work on today's episode. Later this week, it's time. The Brutalist boys have arrived. Let's get brutal. We're talking about Brady Corbet's The Brutalist. See you then.